Welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we report the truth about American exceptionalism. We love our flag, we love our country, and we believe in America. The Definitive Wrap, where we respect people of faith, the men and women in blue, and our support for Israel. And now, your host, Bela Seabrow on The Definitive Wrap.
Hello, and welcome to The Definitive Wrap. I am Bela Seabrow. Thank you to VIN News for hosting our show. It takes a rare individual who becomes deeply and personally familiar with something that is wrong and then dedicates her life to righting that wrong. That person is our special guest today. Perez Shakdam is a French journalist, political analyst, and commentator. She specializes in West Asian and Islamic affairs. Catherine is a former consultant for UNSC on Yemen, and she's an expert on Islamic terrorism, radicalization, and anti-Semitism. Raised in a secular Jewish family in France, Catherine found herself at the very heart of the Islamic world following her marriage to a Muslim from Yemen. Her experience in the Middle East and subsequent work as a political analyst gave her a very particular, if not a rare, viewpoint, especially in how one can lose one's sense of identity when confronting with systemic anti-Semitism. Determined to share her experience and perspective on those issues which unfortunately plague us, specifically Islamic radicalism, terror, and anti-Semitism, Catherine also will speak of a world which often sits out of our reach for a lack of access. Welcome, Catherine, to The Definitive Wrap.
Thank you so much for having me.
My first question will be something you had asked in one of your extremely well-written writings just 2 weeks ago. You wrote, how amazing would it be for Iran's next constitution to enshrine the rejection of anti-Semitism to become the first country to make such a stance? So my question is such a thing even possible?
Do you know what? It's interesting that you bring this up because I've been on Clubhouse for about 2-3 months now only because there was a lot of Iranians who wanted to speak to me, and it's pretty much the only social media that they have access to that allows that kind of informal chat and allow them to maintain some degree of anonymity, because obviously the regime will not allow them to have access to to the outside world without any censorship. I realized that there was a massive gap in between what the regime is saying and how Iranians actually feel when they're allowed to express, themselves without any fear of censorship or, repercussion for their family or their own lives. I have to admit, even though I did travel to Iran and I met all kind of different people, I really felt that anti-Semitism was quite rife amongst Iranians. That was my belief. And then I was confronted to people on Clubhouse that were actually telling me that it wasn't true, and that the reason why while in Iran people were still being quite anti-Semitic is that 70% of Iranians receive their salaries from the government one way or the other, and so they don't have the freedom or the space to actually, tell the world exactly how they feel, and that Clubhouse is a safe space for them. So now they can speak out. And then I got involved, I made a few friends actually who are involved in the opposition parties. So they want to fight the regime. And we had this discussion around, they would keep telling me, we need Israel to come and help us. We need to do this, we need to do that. And I tried to explain to them that it's not so much what Israel can do for them, but what is it that they can do for themselves. And also that they need to still be held accountable. And I did not mean this in a negative or judgmental way, that they needed to be held accountable for the kind of language coming out of Iran. Because obviously from an Israeli or even a Jewish perspective, it's very difficult for anyone, to say, yes, I believe you. Let's forget everything that has happened in the past and let's move on. I do believe that accountability is very important, even if people don't feel that they're responsible for the situation that they kind of inherited. And so we had a discussion around, what is it that we could do? And I was saying that in my mind, the best token of friendship and something that I feel should be a broader discussion with other nations around the world, because anti-Semitism is something that is so profoundly anti-democratic for so many different reasons, that I think making a clear stance against anti-Semitism would actually allow to cut to cut off what feeds racism in general, and intolerance as a broader term. And so I was saying, look, we had the Declaration of Human Rights. We had, of course, the United States Constitution. That is a beautiful testament to, democratic values and aspirations. And I was thinking, what about we use a constitution to actually enshrine, this fight and stand against anti-Semitism and make it unlawful, on that level. Right. And this is something that actually caught on. So we had a whole discussion on Clubhouse around this idea. Now, everybody agreed, obviously. But I was thinking this is something that really kind of spoke to me, and I really want to push it, because I think we talk about the United Nations, we talk about, fighting anti-Semitism in various countries in the West and across the world, but what about actually holding governments accountable, for what is it that they say in terms of their efforts to, prevent and fight against anti-Semitism, put their money where their mouth is, and actually transform their constitution and make a real stance against fascism, terror, in such a way that you would be sending such a clear message to all those groups who thrive on anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, by the way, because let's not forget that anti-Zionism is a euphemism for anti-Semitism, and actually, enshrine it into what is it that makes a pillar of democratic, or democracies. So I was thinking, I'm just going to put it out there on Twitter and see what people say.
Yeah, thank you. Your background is fascinating. You were born to Jewish parents. In fact, from what I understand, your maternal grandfather fought Nazis during the Nazi occupation in France.
He did. I'm actually really, my grandfather has had a huge influence on my life. He was, and I think that this is something that is not discussed enough. And he wasn't the only one, by the way, to join the resistance. About 20%, which is a huge number, of all resistance fighters in France were actually Jews. So that kind of tells you, because there's also a discussion going on right now about, what is it that Jews did during, the Holocaust in terms of fighting back. And I think that, this is how. I mean, it's not the only way. But this is one of the ways that people, kind of contributed to defeating Nazism. And I think it's important. So, he was, as soon as the Nazi occupied France, he joined in and dedicated his life to fighting fascism in all its, shapes.
And I understand that your paternal grandfather was a Holocaust survivor.
Yes, he was sent to. I don't like to use the word, and only because I think that automatically people, think Auschwitz and the death camps. He wasn't sent in the death camps. He was in Tunisia, and Tunisia was, under French mandate at the time, under the Vichy government that was collaborating with Nazi Germany, and the German actually landed in Tunisia for a little bit and occupied Tunisia, and so they went about kind of replicating the policy that they had, across Europe, and then build camps and send people. But they were more kind of internment camps. It wasn't fun. It was terrible. People died. Some members of my family died. But I don't want to make a parallel or in between the suffering that people endured in Auschwitz and other places, and what my family had to go through, because they were the lucky ones. In their hardship, they were the lucky ones because they survived it, and it wasn't as terrible as it could have been. So I think it's important, because I don't want to take away from the pain.
Not taking away. Nothing undermines the suffering that he went through.
I know, but it's just when you say survivor, I know where people's minds go, and I don't want people to feel that I'm taking away from that, because it's not the case. But it's important to talk about the fact that in North Africa, there were internment camps and people died, and Jews were, treated horribly, really harshly. And for some reason, it kind of escaped the narrative when we talk about, the Shoah. People automatically think Eastern Europe, forgetting that millions of people faced, oppression in other places in the world, and it needs to be talked about and it needs to be said.
Right. And then you later married, I believe you met in college, a Muslim who had converted to Islam. You converted to Islam, and you also published books and many articles about Shia Islam. How did you later come to detest Islam?
It's complicated, because look, when I got to the UK and went to university, I was very secular. So religion, and especially I think that being French, being raised in France, you have kind of really weird relationship to religion in general.
In what way? How is the relationship to religion?
It's a very secular. We have this laicity, the concept of laicity, whereby the religious never ever interferes with the public space. So it's not something, even when people identified as Christian, Jews, Muslim, Buddhist, or whatever, in France back then,
right?
It really meant nothing. It was, people, for example, if you were Christian, you would do Christmas and that's about it. But there was no going to church. There was no a true, I would say, understanding of the divine, or people were not living their faith, as a day-to-day thing. It was more like an identity type of thing, but it was kind of like never talked about. It wasn't something that people discussed very much. So, when I met my now ex-husband, and he told me, oh, I'm Muslim, my mind went automatically to some of the people that I grew up with, went to school with, who were Muslim, maybe once a year when it was Ramadan, and they used to say, oh, it's Ramadan, and that was it. So I was thinking, okay, so it's just a thing, but really that it doesn't mean anything. There's no practice, there's no real belief behind it. And boy, oh boy, was I wrong. I had no idea. I was very young.
What did you learn? What did you learn in
I learned very quickly. That Islam was kind of a thing, for him. But also, look, in France, we have Muslims from North Africa, and they have been very westernized. So my understanding of Islam was the Western version that we had back then in France. Now it's very different. People have been radicalized. And so it was the first time, in my entire life that I was confronted from someone from Arabia. So, the Arabic Peninsula, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. So for me, it was a massive culture shock, because I then realized that, oh, hold on a second, Islam is actually real for you. In terms of everything that it preaches, and, that the demands that it makes on your life. And initially, when he asked me to convert to Islam, it was more discussion along the line, this is something that my family would like you to do. You don't have to believe in it. It's just a thing that we do. It's it's
it was more ceremonial.
Yes. So I went along with it because, again, I had no understanding of what that meant.
Right.
And then I found myself caught, I would say, in a world and a society that suffocated me. But it's done in such a way, it's so progressive that you don't always realize it. And they do it with a smile. And they keep telling you along the way that, oh, we have nothing against the Jews. We have nothing against the Jews. But, and, when you're young and you're kind of cut out from your family and you don't know a lot of people, and suddenly everything that is Muslim. It's very difficult to kind of find the strength to kind of step out, especially when suddenly you get pregnant, you have a son, and then you have a daughter, and I'm like, oops, And I realized early on that I had made a massive mistake, but I just didn't know how to get out of it. And I'm quite stubborn, and I was raised in a way that a little bit. I think I was a bit traditional in the sense that, in my mind, if you get married, you stay married,
right?
And so I tried to make it work.
Very traditionally. You were raised very traditionally in that.
My grandfather, I never really dated. So, my grandfather used to tell me, when you find someone that you like, you date and then you marry.
Right.
And I had this, I had this voice in my head saying, you're going to have to make it work, because you may have
against all odds, got to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I tried. I really did. For the sake of my children. Yeah. And it became intolerable. And looking back, I actually can't believe that I tolerated, some of the things that was said and done. But I did for some reason. And something happens to a person, I think, when you're systematically being bullied out of your identity.
Yes.
Is that you end up hating the very thing that makes you you. And because there was so much,
and you trauma bonded, and you also
yeah,
trauma bonded as well.
But you don't understand it when you're living it, which is very strange. It's very strange. So, I started to, in my mind, I internalized, this hatred that was projected onto me, but they were telling me it's not you, it's the Jewish community, it's Israel. And I ended up hating Israel because in my mind, Israel was the source of my suffering because of Israel. Yeah. And because of who I was, I was being bullied. And when I say bullied, I mean viciously bullied. Every day.
Oh
and which, no, it's, do you know what? It was difficult, but I tell you something, it gave me such an armor when it comes to anti-Semitism. So when people now come at me, on social media or in real life, if I do debates on TV, whatever it is, and they come at me and tell me, whatever it is that they say, criticism or threats, I actually laugh it off because I'm like, look, I've heard everything. There is nothing that you could come up with that will shock me, hurt me. And I've learned to dissociate from your words because they mean nothing to me. And I want to, it kind of became, I think, my superpower when it comes to anti-Semitism because it doesn't affect me anymore.
Yeah.
And I wish that people would learn to do this more and to actually, use this hatred that they're throwing at us and use it to make light out of it, and actually tell them no. But I'm not saying that we have to apologize that kind of behavior. We should stand up to it. But at the same time, we have to do a lot better than what they do. Hate we should answer through hate. We should do a lot better, and we have done, and we're doing it. And I think that's the only way forward, quite frankly. But I very, very much regret the price I had to pay, to learn those lessons, because it wasn't a proud moment in my life. The thing that I said and done, I regret profoundly, but they were part of my journey. So I have to embrace them and accept them.
God bless you. Catherine, what have you learned about the way Iran wants to portray themselves to the world in your interviews with their political figures?
Oh, good Lord. I think, look, I've walked the the streets of Tehran and Iran, and I would say that this regime, for me, is the embodiment of evil. Truly, those people want to annihilate. And I say this, when they say death to Israel, death to America, they're talking about the Jews in general, and they have said it over and over again. But for some reason, the world is not listening when they're saying it. They want to see, Judaism and the Jews gone. And the reason why I make the distinction is because I've had countless conversations with, high-ranking clerics, we're talking ayatollahs, telling me they have a profound hatred for Judaism. The reason being, I truly believe that they see such a light in Judaism, such a lesson to the world. They realize that a lot of the time their own teachings are actually have been plagiarized from the Torah and the Talmud, and our history somewhat became their history. Mm-hmm. And so because we are the source of what they deem to be sacred in their own twisted way, because they have kind of twisted it and turned it into something that it wasn't meant to be. They want to see us gone for it. We're holding a mirror to them that threaten them, in the deepest part of their identity. Their hatred is almost irrational, I would say, because I tried to explain to them. I said that the Jewish community is a tiny percentage of the world population. Why are you so focused on annihilating a few million people when you have 1.3 1.2 billion of people following you? Like, why is it about the Jews that bothers you so much? And I think it's tied up to this idea that their Messiah will come when all the Jews are annihilated. And so they end, the vision that they have, for the end of time, and for their freedom, to be saved, their salvation is tied to our demise. And this is something that it's quite interesting, isn't it? This is something that they are lobbying for, petitioning for, preaching for, and living for, and dying for.
Yeah.
And also, which I think is quite interesting, as much as Judaism is actually putting the emphasis on life and, the necessity to protect life, whatever the cost, they put the emphasis on martyrdom.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that life means nothing but death is somewhat glorious.
Oh,
it's quite interesting because I think they are the very opposite of who we are. Not just as a faith, but as a people, what we stand for as a people. And I just, I think that we're missing the boat when it comes to Iran, failing to understand, that yes, there's a political dimension to what is it that they want to do. They have, geopolitical ambitions, but there is an underlying religious drive that we fail to appreciate because we can't relate to that kind of narrative. There's a conceptual gap in that, people keep thinking we can negotiate with them. We're going to try to entice them with the promises of, economic realignment. It won't take, because those people do not care about, the well-being of their own people. What they care about is, this ascent of the Mahdi to come and save them and lead this great war against the Jews. That's what they're waiting for. And so they're playing for time. And I reached a point where I don't know how to tell people that, because they think I'm absolutely insane, telling me, but we don't believe in this. I said, but you don't have to. They do. Right. So believe that they do. That's all you need to know. And I have to say, I think that the only, I would say, state official that, who actually took the risk, and was actually mocked across social media for doing it, was Benjamin Netanyahu. When he went at the UN, used the cartoon thing about the whole, nuclear bomb. I think he was trying to make a point and it was misunderstood. He was trying to literally explain to a bunch of kids, because they were not willing to listen, this is what we're facing. Did you understand that, those people are not like us? They don't think like us. They don't behave like us. They don't see the future, as something that should be, good for the rest of the world. They see a future where, death would be worshipped. But people are not listening.
Yeah. You have been accused of spying for Israel against Iran. Their claims are that you infiltrated Iran. Can you tell us about that, please?
Look, first of all, the second you disagree with the regime and you say anything against the regime, by the way, you are either, a CIA agent, Mossad agent, whatever. Usually one of those two countries, which is interesting because they don't consider other countries. So they don't care if you spying for Spain, for example, that it doesn't compute. It's always about America and Israel because those are the two, devils, and they're absolutely petrified. The other thing is that Iranians have an obsession over the Mossad, and only because way back when the Shah was running the country, he actually reached out to Israel in terms of it building up his own intelligence services, and Israel, entertained and actually offered to train, in the art of intelligence, SEVAC members. So that's why I think there's been a conflation of idea, and they think that, anything to do with intelligence in regards to Iran is somewhat tied up to Israel. And also, I think that they believe that the Jews have great superpowers, and that Israel is mighty. 6 Days War, I think it played up a lot into building this mythology of, being untouchable. And so they think that, Mossad, can do all sorts of things, even supernatural things, and that they everywhere know everything. And so, evidently, anytime that something happens, and they can't explain it, you're a Mossad agent. It's as simple as that. It's obviously ludicrous. I'm not. But look, I think the more I say it that I'm not, the more people's going to say, well, there you go, she's denying it.
Right. Can you tell us about Yemen? Why is there such a humanitarian crisis there? And why aren't the other neighboring countries assisting them?
It's complicated in Yemen because, first of all, the humanitarian crisis was very much architected by Saudi Arabia. There's a blockade. There's a blockade on Yemen. This is not a criticism, by the way. Yes, people are suffering tremendously, mainly by the hands of the Houthis and those factions who are not interested in building peace. Saudi Arabia made the mistake of believing that by blockading Yemen, it would, force people's hand into rebelling against the Houthis, and it didn't work. It also banked on the idea that the Houthi would actually care, for the fate of the people that they were ruling over. Mistake. They don't care. They're very Iranian in their way of thinking, where they're quite happy like ruling over a cemetery, if that means that they're ruling. So this idea that they would actually bow to pressure because they want to feed their people is a ludicrous notion. They would never do that. They do not care about their own people's life. And you also have the problem of humanitarian misappropriation, which is, by the way, a theme that is running across the region. If you look, for example, the EU just recently unfroze money that was meant for the Palestinian authorities on allegation, obviously, a few months ago, no, last year, that some of the funds were actually going towards Hamas, for example, and funding certain activities that should not be funded ever. And there's a profound lack of oversight when it comes to humanitarian aid. So governments and NGOs are basically signing a blank check, hoping that the money will go to the right people, and then it usually never does. And if it does, it's the trickle. So you need to be very careful, because even if 20% of the money that is earmarked, for example, for feeding Yemeni children is going to Al Qaeda or the Houthis, you're essentially propping up terrorism. Mm-hmm. So you can't be doing that. It's a very tricky situation, and I understand that people feel outraged and want to help people there. Obviously, so do I. The problem and the real question that you need to ask yourself is that this situation has been weaponized by the very group that we're trying to fight. And so the only hope that we have is to actually stand behind international law and actually go by the rule of law, and agree that we can never ever fall prey to this wager that terrorists have had over us, using our humanity and our democratic values to try to weaponize that against us and actually empower their networks. We can't do that. And I know it sounds terrible because it means that people are dying on the ground. I realize that, but we're not responsible for that situation. They are, and we need to hold them accountable. But you can't fight terrorism by using good sentiments, thinking that maybe someone is going to go towards financing Al Qaeda, for example, but I'm going to feed a child. In the long term, you're not helping anything. So we need to find a better way, and a better way would be, for example, to go back to what NGO Monitor in Israel is actually trying to do, which is to advocate for the creation of a vetting process that would allow for the money to actually go to the real people in need of help, and ensure that there's good analysis on the ground as to understand what is it that people need, give it to them without helping, those networks that we don't want to help.
Right. We have time for one more question. There is a tremendous rise in radicalism in the Middle East, and it's affecting the entire world. In your opinion, how can that be resisted?
We need to get rid of Iran regime. Simple. I mean, they are literally propping up, I would say 90% of terrorism around the world. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, name it, Iran is behind it. We need to get rid of them. We need to isolate them as much as possible. I'm not talking about military strike. I'm talking about systematic cutting off of all the terror networks. And Western capitals need to stop, thinking that Iran and the regime are actually, partners in peace building. They are not. They need to be completely isolated and not spoken to ever. Those people deserve to be sent to the ICC. They are fascists, they are war criminals, and they have committed crimes against humanity. We should not be talking to them because we are engaging with terror. And I'm sorry, but I would call back. I would tell them to send back all their diplomats. I would not talk to that regime.
Catherine, Thank you for joining us today. You do incredible work.
Thank you.
Thank you to VIN News and to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to The Definitive Wrap with your host, Bela Seabrow. Be sure to tell your family and friends they also can catch The Definitive Wrap on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite streaming service. See you next time on The Definitive Wrap.